Totally. Well, I have to tell you, I'm so excited for this. I do not interact with many women who are interested in psychedelics or anything like that. So I'm so excited for this. Yeah.
Oh, well, my pleasure then. Yeah.
So let's jump in.
I have that book I was telling you about right here. As a matter of fact,
I downloaded it immediately on Kindle and started reading it. And I am a note taker. And so I've been taking lots of notes of things that just kind of stand out to me about it.
Oh my God, I love it. Did you do drawings too?
Well, I'm a doodler. And
no, I love it.
Yeah. So that's how I absorb information. If I write it out in big colorful print, I can remember it. So it's just my learning.
I love that. No, I actually even took a class on the visual art of listening, and you literally take written visual notes.
Yeah. That's how I see things in my head. So I just kind of put it on paper. It's the best way for me to learn.
I totally get that. I know. I'm like, maybe I should do this all the time,
Yeah. I have so many books filled with notes of just everything that I've learned. So like one day when I die, someone's going to come in here and go, what the hell, Mom? Did you write everything now? You have to read it. What do we do with it? I don't know. To figure
I know. I have so many different ways of like taking notes. Like I have like different books for different things and different like this. Well, actually, this one's pretty neat. Actually, this one's just like by itself.
Oh, you don't have a million Post-its sticking out of it?
Oh, no. Well, this
one. There you go. Yep, I do that too.
and it is funny because it even says my personal agenda.
Yeah.
This is where all my notes on psychedelic ethics are. In case anyone you can even see it here. It's like psychedelic ethics. These are my scribbles.
Oh, well, that's a really good topic to just start from, is the ethics involved in psychedelics, because I think a lot of people believe that psychedelic use is unethical in itself. So, and that's what's, I got to tell you, you're kind of like spread out there in all these different areas and categories. I was super excited about that, right? Because usually you find someone, oh, I'm an ethicist. You're boring and you don't do anything else then, but you are all over the place. Like I even saw you did a tarot. You were instructing people on how to use tarot. And I'm like,
yes,
this is my people right here. She is.
I have those right by me too. Here, I'll give you. I have this is the archetype step by Kitten Crans. Love that.
Okay, I am right now reading between the Psychedelic Mysteries of the Feminine and Carl Jung's archetypes of the collective unconscious. So that's awesome.
Yeah, if you don't have the archetypes deck, then you should get it.
Oh, yeah. I've been looking at tarot cards. I don't know enough about it. I've never had a reading done. Like I participate in online readings and stuff, and a lot of stuff resonates with me, but it's also an interesting topic that we could totally talk about.
So this is one of my primary decks. And we'll just see what comes out for you right now.
Oh, okay.
So, gosh, it's funny because this is recorded, so maybe you shouldn't see what everyone. So basically, the general energy is that you're in a new adventure and a new beginning in your life. It's the end of a lot of anxiety and issues that you've had in terms, especially with your mental thoughts and experiences. It's come to a conclusion now. The new beginning has caused a lot of disruption in your life, but it's a positive disruption because the general energy. This is a major arcana having to do with your soul's growth and evolution. So it's
just moved into a new house in a new town, and it has created a lot of just upset and inconvenience in just restructuring and getting used to. Like my husband's got a new job, so there's a new schedule and there's new plans, and then there's a new schedule for me and the kids because I homeschool. And then wow.
No, so I mean, but back to the archetypes idea, right? And that's not how you generally do reads. I just like a little bit, but the Fool, right? That's a major archetype. And so the tarot cards, you can see them as being about your own psychology, your own subconscious, uncovering the unconscious. You could see them as divination. And open yourself to the possibilities. And I think a lot of times, whether it's in ethics or in psychology or in psychedelics, we can get stuck in mindsets about what we think something is. that, even just a
Yes.
tarot deck for some would be forbidden.
Yes.
It would be
That
magic.
that is an interesting statement to make too. Yeah. I think collectively the world is going through something that we're stuck in. And mentally wise, we're stuck in our mindsets about what we've been told to believe and what we think we believe without a lot of, I guess, skepticism and self-criticism for really exploring what it is that we say we believe. And I just think that there's such an awakening taking place. And sometimes I feel like even saying that is cliche because it's like, well, maybe an awakening's always been taking place and everyone's just becoming aware of it. But in the same turn, it seems like a lot more information is being given to us wherever we get our information from through the media, through the social media. And it's really kind of like confronting a lot of people to take a pause and step back and go, wait a minute, what do I believe? So that's just really interesting. So I want to first dig into, you're an ethicist. So let's start there. And let's gravitate towards how the hell did you end up in psychedelics and tarot reading?
So what do you want to know about ethics?
Well, so you're a teacher as well?
Yeah, I am a lecturer at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I primarily teach bioethics, which is like applied ethics in the field of the biomolecular engineering and sciences, biotech, including psychedelics. It would be covered in bioethics. And I teach for the biomolecular engineering department and philosophy departments there. It's cross-listed, and it's a great school, great program. I really have appreciated being a part of teaching ethics there.
So say I'm walking into one of your classes, just for the listeners, for those who maybe don't understand what ethics is, what is it that you're teaching? What are like kind of like the fundamental pillars of what you want to introduce your students to?
Well, it's interesting you asked this right now, because before this, I was recording a video for them to watch asynchronously for a class. Like my class just started last week, and due to COVID, I've started offering a lot of my courses and work online. And but what they would basically get, and what I tell my students, is that I'm not here to change your values or what you believe or what your ethics are. I want you to have a better understanding of what you believe and what you value and what's important to you. And through the process of this course, you'll come to a greater understanding of yourself, I hope, as well as an understanding of others and holding space for other people's values and ideas, and apply it to your work.
So it sounds like you're teaching people how to be compassionate.
I hope so, but I guess that's not on the course syllabus. Is like you must be compassionate by the end. But you could say that is in part what ethics is about, but that itself is an ethical judgment on what ethics ought to be. But for myself, at least, I usually self-declare that my ethics is about love and compassion and community.
I like that a lot. Yeah. And when I was first introduced to ethics, I didn't see it that way until I kind of dug in. And then what it just helps you see is that there are all these possibilities and perspectives out there for consideration. You don't have to necessarily accept or reject them. You can kind of be indifferent to a lot of things that are out there, but it's about, and this is kind of like the tagline for my podcast too, is just compassionately considering other perspectives without
Absolutely.
it having to feel like it's an attack or an insult against your character or your beliefs. And so anyway, so in ethics, that leads you over to the bioethics area and into psychedelics. And so let's see, I first engaged with you on Twitter and it was about psychedelics. And I was trying to see if there was someone else out there who maybe resonated with what some of my psychedelic experiences have been like and how they have impacted me both mentally and emotionally, but also like physiologically, like, and I had presented to you, like, do men and women experience psychedelics differently? And you were like, well, let's move beyond the gender and the constructs. And I'm down with that. But in just my own personal comparisons with my male friends versus my female friends, and those of us who have experienced psychedelics, there seems to be a significant difference in, I would just say, what is revealed and what is experienced. And so that was one of my questions posed to you. And I'm wondering if we can just expand on that a little bit, dig into there, just kind of share with the audience what you've seen, what you've observed, and what you kind of teach on and instruct on about psychedelics and the experiences.
Well, it's worth possibly declaring at first that my expertise in my PhD was on ethical decision making and moral psychology, in the sense of how framing affects mindset, affects your values and how you make decisions. And it's through that lens that I often view these sort of questions. And also, you could say, because of philosophical training, like you were saying, being able to hold multiple viewpoints and yet not fully engage in any of them, but being willing to hold space for them in a compassionate way, really listening, really trying to understand them. So the first part about the framing of men and women, are they different type of thing, that sort of in terms of the psychedelic experience. Like if I was just to answer that top level question, I would just have to say yes. But then the question is why? And one is, it is still going to be my comment about, gender constructs, about what is feminine and what is masculine. And I identify as being a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, as being bi/pansexual, depending upon how you want to define those things. And my daughter's also transgender. And I want to make sure we're always holding space for those different identities. And I know you're supportive of that. But that actually is also part of the answer as well, because if women and men are actually trained in different gender identities, different frameworks in terms of how they understand themselves, that let's say a woman is supposed to be more receptive and not assertive. A man is supposed to be assertive and not responsive, not receiving, not emotional, not feeling. And you come into the psychedelic space with that idea, you're automatically going to have a different set, because you literally have a different set. You have a different mindset coming into the experience. And it's from that framework you're coming into the experience, and it's shifting from that space. And you'll find commonalities with other women, in part simply because you've had the exact same socialization, colonialization, conceptualization of your own identity. Now, that's one aspect, but then there's also like common aspects of like biological aspects, of even a feminine identity, even if you've embraced a feminine identity and how you see yourself and how you want to see yourself and how you're choosing to construct your identity. And even the one thing I've thought a lot about, I think you mentioned in the Twitter feed that we were having, is about, for instance, biological body-based periods, menstruation.
Yeah. Like what I noticed for me is if I use psychedelics while I'm menstruating, it stops. And then I don't have cramps, and I am feeling less emotional, less reactive. And I was like, this is actually kind of phenomenal. If more women were comfortable with maybe even microdosing, because one of the times I was microdosing over like 3 days. And I was just like floored by the release from those expectations of the period and why it's so dreadful. And it was like, oh, I'm just existing in my body. There's blood coming out, but it's not hurting me. And it's been such a weird phenomenon for me. And of course, on Twitter, I don't want to be like, hey, has anyone else noticed the size of their clots are decreasing when they microdose? You know what I mean? But I noticed that too. I'm working up to it. I mean, I'm bold in some of my stuff, but and I mean, we really just need to be able to have these conversations out loud in the public sphere anyway, without any shame or worry about embarrassment as it is. But yeah, I did notice
that gets exactly to the point again, right? Like we're women, at least in the West, we're trained, and in a lot of other cultures too, that periods are something to be ashamed of, to be hidden. You don't want someone to see like you have a a tampon or a pad in your bag or purse. You don't label it as, this is my like, or I'm not going to the bathroom to go to the bathroom. I'm going to the bathroom because I'm bleeding right now and I don't want to bleed out into my pants or something like that. You don't say that, or it's not seen as like an empowering thing, like thinking about the archetypes again. The feminine power used to be in part from her fact that she had the menstrual blood, and being able to, for instance, collect the menstrual blood to even use in your garden or at least to fertilize grounds with it, and a source of power. The feminine power was this menses cycle. So imagine if you saw it as the time of power, not that I'm about fling around power, as it were, but in the sense of the mystery of the feminine, and what makes the power bringing birth and life is what has also been exalted in the feminine. And yet I don't feel like I was trained, at least, to embrace that as an empowering experience. It was something to be ashamed of, or not talked about, or discreet, or that time of the month, or and I will agree with you. I find that there is a difference when I'm menstruating or when I'm not menstruating, and how it affects my menstruation. And I try and take plant medicines intuitively. And I was noticing recently that I've had a recent pattern where I've been led to do plant medicines right when my cycle starts. And it wasn't a planned thing. I wasn't trying to do it then. And it really made me wonder, like, wow, if I had this other mindset about, the feminine magic or power of the cycle, and I embrace that more, then would I be more inclined to journey when I'm cycling as as the sense of the power point, as it were, of rebirth.
That's really interesting. Yeah, to really go inside to your cycle of your birth, your death, and your rebirth, essentially, is kind
Yeah.
of the way that I've been looking at my cycles lately. Is like, okay, all in a week, I am giving birth, but I'm also giving birth to death. And I read this from, I think, a book called The Theology of the Womb. It just helped me really like re-examine the way that I see my period, and to be more intentional about, while it is painful and I am an emotional wreck sometimes, this is like a really transforming time for my cycle that I should be grateful about, and not, because I think a lot of women are like, I hate my period. But like, if you really flip the switch on how you even look at it,
Right.
I've noticed even just cramping has decreasing, just from the way that I'm like, I'm receiving this because this is my gift, and this is about life and rebirth and transformation. And sometimes I just have a mentality of like, I am ridding myself of all of the things that do bring me death. Maybe, it's just all about the perspective and the lens that you put on like what you're experiencing, that can help you have a better outlook on not only your life, but the lives around you that are connected to you too. So, but I'm so glad I'm not alone in that, because I haven't received a lot of feedback when I ask people that. I'm like, what's going on? Like, where are the studies about this? What does this mean? And it's like, where do you find this information? So,
Well, and it's a real struggle. I mean, even I've had conversations about, more conversations more and more with other women about parenting and psychedelics, and childbirth and psychedelics, and nursing and psychedelics and plant medicines, and this pain point of that there's not enough research, that even trying to responsibly use plant medicines. As an ethicist, I definitely care about that. I think most people in the space do and are responsible with their use, but it makes it a lot more challenging if you don't even have the information. I should be sharing about Michaela gave a talk, and I try to remember her last name right now, and I apologize, Michaela, that I don't remember your last name, at the psilocybin summit, about pregnancy and childbirth, and talking about this, and about like the one like rat study that's out there on seeing whether psilocybin goes into the fetus, right? And there's so many things about the study that aren't actually helpful for pregnant women. It doesn't actually help give us good advice. And we're so, for instance, like they didn't feed them psilocybin, they were injected. And just on that alone, that could be a significant difference in terms of the study, in terms of what, but they did show that it did get to the fetus, right? But of course, like they injected the
Yeah.
but then in order to find out that they went to the fetus, they kill all the animals. And so it's not like they studied what happened to the development cycle of those fetuses afterwards. It was just to show that they had the psilocybin, but it also isn't the manner of delivery that most people have psilocybin.
Yeah.
So and then it's used as a scare tactic for women to not engage in plant medicines while they're pregnant or nursing. And I'm not saying anyone necessarily should or shouldn't, but the fact that, you know, it's being used in a way that's not informed and not really educated in a way. And there's a strong bias in our culture, both in terms of, you know, granted, at least the research is changing now to have more data and more research. And that's why people are talking about the psychedelic renaissance. But I think there needs to be an acknowledgement of the fact that we need to make decisions now without adequate information. And we don't have attachment to a lot of the histories, the indigenous traditions that had the wisdom, that had the knowledge, that had, you know, that could have helped us.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Yeah, that's the one thing that I find most common in my research is just kind of the pointing back to Native Indigenous traditions and rituals that incorporate the use of psychedelics and other plant medicines. Like I was even studying the uses of tobacco, like traditional ancient uses of tobacco with Native Indigenous tribes, like here in the United States. And I was like, oh, so I'm smoking wrong. Okay, I got it, because I'm a cigarette smoker. But just in reading some of this stuff, and I'm like, duh, why didn't I like put that together the way I've put it together for like my cannabis use and my LSD use or my psilocybin use? Is like, you have to do it with intention, because otherwise you're just abusing it and you're not getting the medicinal properties out of it. And of course, what we know in our own United States history is no one really actually wants to tell us anything about the native tribes, about their rituals, about their practices, anything, because it's like we're just trying to, oh no, we're going to forget about that. And we're moving towards a more like the pharmacology industry, and like what can the scientists produce for us in a lab versus what's already available to us in nature that we're already divinely connected to if we really opened our eyes to embrace that. And so I just have a really great appreciation for that. It's like sometimes I'm 40 years old and I'm like, I never knew all of this stuff. Like, why wasn't I taught this in school? Like, this is more beneficial to me, because especially like teach me about what the tribes in this state were doing 100 years ago. And we could all implement that into our daily activities, and we could probably have better overall qualitative health. But that's not going to make other people money. So there's, to a degree, an understanding of why they don't share that information with us.
Yeah, and there's a real thirst for that knowledge now, and then it brings in new dangers and new new concerns about, for instance, like cultural appropriation of indigenous practices and the lack of respect or not acknowledging the centuries of traditions and stuff that where it came from, and yet there's that need there for understanding and learning, and it is definitely a good thing in the sense of us wanting to have that knowledge and shifting our perspective, like we were saying earlier, holding that space for other voices that we ourselves put out.
Yeah, definitely. So you said you were at a psilocybin summit, and then did I also see that you were, or did you say you were also attending an MDMA summit? Was that what it was?
I don't think I'm trying to like, I'm literally
or maybe I just saw something in your Twitter feed about an MDA summit.
Yeah, no, I think there is one. I want to like check my calendar. Right? It's like, because like if anything, there's like a constant feed of conferences and talks that I like. Before the psilocybin one, I think I was at the DMT one.
Oh, DMT, I think that's what it was. Okay, yeah.
Maybe it was that one.
Yeah.
But there is one coming up on MDMA, and there's another one coming up. But it's like, so but that's one of the beautiful things is there's a lot more conversations, both academically and non-academically, as it were, and not that it's less,
Yeah.
right? Within the psychedelic communities, that where people are sharing their knowledge and wisdom, and there's more of these bridging conversations between indigenous and Western and science and others, but it's still very much an awkward growth phase right now.
So
But
the DMT summit, can you talk about DMT? My son used DMT and it scared the bejesus out of him. And so I've been hesitant about it. But I'm wondering if you can share any interesting facts or anything that you've discovered about DMT, and maybe if you know, why does it petrify people so much?
well, I actually think we have a lot of fear around a lot of the psychedelics.
Yeah.
I actually at one point you were mentioning, like, how did I get into these relationships? Like, in some sense, as I myself reflect on these questions, I'm like, well, I realized I was raised with the fear of mushrooms. Because my dad thought he was allergic, and so I was usually allergic to everything he was allergic to, and so I was told not to ever eat mushrooms. Even when I became vegetarian, I was avoiding mushrooms, and that's not even talking about people's fear about psychedelic mushrooms, right? There's a general fear about mushrooms, and not, like, not having quote unquote death caps or Amanita muscaria, which I've been studying too. And for DMT, I wouldn't say that I have a lot of, I wouldn't be the best one to speak on DMT, but one things I find really curious about, I mean, for instance, DMT is active, and not just like sort of having the sort of DMT experience, as it were, but also it's active in a lot of plants. There were some motions to try and make DMT ban, but they realized they would have to ban all these different plants that have DMT in it. And then
What kind of plants have DMT in it?
um you know like, I again,
Just
I
like
don't,
native random plants that grow?
plants that you have probably in your backyard that you
Huh.
don't know. I mean, and again, lower amounts, and then there's evidence, that, again, I can't speak to, but that supposedly argues that we have DMT in our own bodies and our brains, so we have DMT as well.
Kind of like
So
cannabinoid
DMT,
receptors?
yeah, kind of like cannabinoid
Okay.
receptors,
Okay.
but DMT, we actually generate our own DMT, and I don't know a lot of the facts around that. But chacruna and ayahuasca, DMT is one of the ingredients that is activated in an ayahuasca experience as well. So and it's interesting because I never thought I would be trying to understand neurobiology as an ethicist. So that's my stretch area. So I'm very hesitant to speak on those topics, but it's worth being curious about. And I get curious primarily about why is it that we have these fears and this resistance to these different plant medicines and psychedelics? How much of it is because of cultural mindsets and biases, or industry or commercialization, or puritanical sort of leftovers of colonial concepts of what is quote unquote primitive, or it being a quote unquote witch or something like that. If you mess with a bunch of different herbs and with the natural plants and natural world, there was a mystery of that divine feminine that, like, well, I don't understand it, therefore it must be dangerous, therefore, get rid of it. And I think we have a natural fear psychologically of anything we don't know or don't understand, whether it be a person, an indigenous culture, a plant medicine, or the person next door. And I think with the war on drugs that's been like over 50 years now, which really I feel I want everyone wants to declare the end of it, the criminalization of these drugs that should not have ever been criminalized, in my humble opinion. And the pain and damage that's been caused by that. And part of that is literally a damage in our own mindsets and what we see as safe or harmful, and a bias, a very clear bias against psychedelics. And to the question you asked earlier about psychedelics being seen as unethical, it's because of this very extreme bias in our culture that any sort of that sort of exploration is dangerous, that it's not okay to explore the internal mysteries of the mind, and that it's that literally the ideas of counterculture and or that the idea of the bad trip, like how much damage has been done by the idea of the bad trip there. And for the record, I don't feel like there are any bad trips.
I'm gonna have to concur with that. Even in instances where maybe I felt like I just didn't get what I wanted out of the psychedelic experience, I've never had a bad trip. If anything, I mean, from LSD, I get bloating, but I think that's pretty common with a lot of people.
Well, and I think a lot of it is like, and actually, I should give a shout out to Fireside support line. They have a peer-to-peer support line, and they definitely have that mentality as well, that you're trying to work through it. You work through the experience, and especially if we're thinking about psychedelic therapies and healing and therapeutic aspects of it, I think that's a lot of the mindset that's shifting now as we coin the psychedelic renaissance and have evidence of the healing that indigenous and traditions have known for centuries and have always had that view. Like you were saying with mother tobacco, it's always was considered actually one of the more powerful medicines. And some traditions, you never even inhale it, right?
Yeah.
Because that would be disrespectful.
Yeah, but just the smudging of it in
Yeah,
itself
using for
is.
smudging and for clearing, it's considered very powerful, and for releasing, and so many things like that. And that's just tobacco. I mean, not just, yeah, out of respect to mother tobacco, but like that the bad trip or something like that. It's if we're doing healing and we have traumas and we have quote unquote bad experiences in our lives that we all have. We're all human. Those can come up in a psychedelic experience, and they're coming up for your own healing, to be released. Just like people get upset of the purging that can happen with ayahuasca or some other plant medicines, well, it's a release of toxins. It's actually a help to you. It's of service to you. And I'm not saying that there aren't things that can be in balance, and that there can't be too much, and that there should be responsible use, and that you can't go too hard too fast type of idea. I think you absolutely can, and it can be more traumatizing, and you can have but if you think about it in the lens of trauma and healing, you get a different conversation than if you say something can be a bad trip.
Yeah, like they're coming out. I've seen I've seen a lot of studies, and I've also heard, like, I mean, even Joe Rogan talks about this on his podcast, and MDMA specifically in helping PTSD. So talking
Yes.
about helping vets who are coming back from
Yes.
serving in the military and being stuck in this perpetual trauma. Just one dose of MDMA can pull them out and bring them back into a healthy lifestyle where they're balanced again. And so there are a lot of positive benefits.
I want to hesitate just a second there. It's like I want to also avoid, the cure-all mindset of
Yes.
psychedelics as well. That's like
Individual healing. Yeah.
Nothing is ever a one and done sort of thing. And most of the work I will often tell people is actually an integration and the healing around the experience, and not just the experience in and of itself. But you're absolutely right. Like I've never been more convinced by data in my life than when I looked at some of the studies, whether from Johns Hopkins or from MAPS or some of these other sources, like the MAPS studies looking at recalcitrant PTSD with veterans and MDMA, showing that after, for instance, like 3 different sessions of MDMA combined with therapy, both before and after, and over a period of time, that and recalcitrant PTSD just means that they've tried it's that they've had at least a couple different pharmaceutical inventions, and with either no success or little success, or not significant improvement, and that the PTSD that classification continues, but go through the treatment, and several of them have shown to not have testing as being PTSD, not being depressed anymore, no longer being clinically depressed. And that's huge, or people coming out of a tobacco study and having, the same with psilocybin, and having a few sessions of psilocybin combined with therapy again, and having been able to quit for over a year without going back.
Yeah, I haven't jumped into that intentionality yet because I think I like tobacco too much,
Oh,
but
I'm not telling you to stop.
no, 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 no. I know. It's just, I no, but that's true. I mean, right. So like when I started talking about psychedelic use with other people, they're like, so did you quit smoking? And I was like, well, no. Well, I heard it helps people quit smoking. Yes, if that's what your intention is. But I like smoking, so I'm not ready to give it up yet. So there's that. But
That's
that
funny.
is true. There have been significant breakthrough studies with that tobacco. And I know somebody who was a smoker for 45 years, and she did two two trips, and she was like, I don't ever want a cigarette again. And I was like, wow, like you went to some traveling in your brain and into your past where you were able to just let that go. And I thought, well, when I'm ready for it, I'm going to do that, and hopefully it'll work. But that is, and with helping people quit using alcohol, quit using methamphetamine, things like that, it can help if you're intentional about it, if you're therapizing the whole journey too. You can break a lot of really bad addictions that have been troubling to you.
Well, and the interesting thing to me is that, like for instance, with the tobacco studies, like one of the highest correlations with success was whether or not they reported having had a mystical experience. And and so
Wow.
now I'll leave that aside for now, just to say that it's not it's an indicator of what's happening internally, in my opinion, that it's because of the healing that's happening inside, or the meaning or the values, because I'm an ethicist, right? I'm going to think in those terms, that you find even the mystical, right? Like you found greater meaning. You find, like in studies that have been done by NYU involving palliative care in people who are facing their deaths, for instance, like cancer patients and terminal cancer patients, given the option of having psilocybin before, um, and finding peace and no longer being depressed, facing their own death before they die, which is such a beautiful thing and a beautiful gift, to be able to give someone that peace. And it even prolongs their life, just to simply not be depressed, but the quality of life.
Wow.
And there's so much promise across the board. But and sometimes almost the painful thing is the fact that this knowledge has been known for centuries, and because we chose to to colonize, or however you want to interpret like what the story is about what happened. But even from ourselves, like going back to the menstrual cycles, like as I started connecting more to nature and to myself more, and to how I felt, and that being important, which sounds really basic, but I think being raised in a particular way, I thought it didn't matter how I felt, it mattered how others people felt.
Yeah, it's interesting too. And going back to this book that I was reading about the theology of the womb, is learning about all of these ancient traditions where women would gather in red tent societies
Yes.
and would enjoy each other's company and be there to support and encourage each other during this time of their cycle. And I'm like, where are the red tent societies? Like, why
I'm
do
wearing
we?
red right now. There you go.
I love it.
And I'm cycling right now. I'll just tell you right now, so we can bond right now and have our own little red tent.
There we go. But I mean, isn't that something that's like we're taught, like, what, even in biblical teachings, set her outside, she's dirty, she's unclean. And I'm like, no, they were giving us whole freaking tents and villages and saying, leave the women alone. This is a very important magical cycle for her, a time in her life where we should be in gratitude for what she's experiencing. And now it's like, I've been to people's homes where you can't even say the word tampon without them going la 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 la. I don't want to hear it. I don't talk about that. I'm talking about my ex right now, right? Like, and our we have a daughter together, which is ironic. Like, she can't even talk about menstruation around her dad without him freaking out. But
Yeah, I have
yeah,
an ex, so
we
you
have
can.
suppressed the most like fundamental, basic, natural thing that a woman goes through, and have shamed it and act like it's not important. It's very important. But
Yeah.
overall feminine, the feminine divine, I think, has been really suppressed. And I
So
think with psychedelics, what I have, again, this is all anecdotal and secondhand information from other male friends, but through their psychedelic experiences, they've come to realize, like, they were like, prior to that, they were like, I'm secure in my masculinity. And they go through a psychedelic experience and they're like, oh my God, what did I was missing so much. And it's like coming to terms with, there's a feminine balance here that has been suppressed from men in
Yes,
so
absolutely.
many societies. And I think just exploring that in my own with psychedelic experiences is coming to, I used to, I guess, view myself as the crazy woman, right? I represent chaos. That's just the role I play, but it's so much more than that. And it's just overall like the feminine has been suppressed. And so how do we bring that back?
Yeah, and it's interesting because like I was part of a women's group. I was actually through the UK Psychedelic Society, and they had this series, Gaia. She runs a beautiful class, and we go through different archetypes of the divine feminine, and the different parts, and really a lot of it is just to not only be familiarized and understand different ways of thinking through these archetypes, but as divine, as positive aspects of ourselves, re-envisioning like the maiden aspect of, coming into that period. And then when you come into, like, or even the crone phase, like when, all these different aspects of femininity and masculinity, because we're all tied into both. I personally think we have the divine feminine and masculine within each of us. And if we teach it sort of, I'll just call it a toxic feminine archetype or a toxic masculine archetype, it harms us both. It harms both aspects of ourselves, the feminine and masculine aspects of ourselves, as well as the feminine and masculine bodies. But I think back to your point about raising consciousness, I definitely think we're at a point of more collective awakening and consciousness. And I am an eternal optimist for sure. But I see it, even in terms of talking about feminine and cycles and things like that. I'm having these conversations now, even with my daughter who's transgender, who has a biological male body but identifies as female, and she transitioned at a young age. She's 11 now and transitioned at about 5.5, 6. That's a whole nother story. But I'm open with my kids about when I'm menstruating, when I'm having a period. And like my daughter's like, well, yeah, I won't be able to have kids, but I don't have to have periods, mom. And she keeps rubbing it in. Like she's like proud of the fact that she doesn't have to have periods,
But you're kind of missing out on it too, honey. Just want to say.
I know.
No.
Well, that's
Okay.
the thing. It's okay. I got to empower this a little bit more,
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'll do a sort of stereotypical like sort of discomfort sort of thing, I'm like with a cramping or something like that, and she's like, yeah, I don't have periods.
Yeah, I think that's really important to bring your children on board with what you're going through every month too. And I did that with all of my children. I did it more so with my younger children than my older children. But I did it almost spitefully with my older children just because their dad was so, la, 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 I don't want to have it. Yeah. And then I remember really early on in my relationship with my husband before we were married too. He had heard me and I was like, crap, I'm out of fucking tampons. And he's like, do you want me to go get you some? And I went, wait, you would like be seen holding like a box in public? Yeah. And so like from then on, I was like, he's comfortable. Okay, we can do this. And so even with my kids, and sometimes it's just like, mommy's got the owies in her tummy right now, right? Like, or I got cramps, or I'm even saying things like, go get mommy a pad if I'm out of one in one bathroom, go get this
Yeah,
for me. So they know what it is and they're not embarrassed by it. And they know it's
that's
like,
right.
and I think we can do even simple things, right? And I noticed this from my sister-in-law a long time ago, and I never understood why it didn't dawn on me earlier, but I was like, she just left her pads and tampons in baskets right there on the toilet. And I was like, well, that's weird. And then I was like, well, no, it's not. She's not ashamed of her period. She's a
That's right.
woman with
That's right.
children. And that kind of like just influenced me to really stop being ashamed of it. And it's like, it's so weird how just those little like things can kind of stimulate that mimetic program for us to imitate something and
No,
not even realize we're
absolutely.
implementing it into our life in a positive way. Like, I don't have to be embarrassed that I'm on my period. And I don't need, and I mean, I think we see that I never had one, but as generations are advancing, you see things like menstruation parties and period parties and celebrating like the first time a child gets her
Yeah.
period. And I remember thinking at first, well, that's weird. But now it's like, no, it's not. It's empowering, because we
No, I
need to bring
mean,
it back to the
like
importance
the
of it.
Dene, the Navajo, though I can't speak for their tradition as a whole, but I do understand that when the girls have their first period, it is an invitation to their motherhood. It is celebrated. It is, you know, honored, and they're excited, and they look forward to having their first period. Right, you know, and that almost makes me choked up and want to cry, because like I did not have that experience. You know, there's a
Yeah, I
certain,
didn't either.
and I think, you know, as we ourselves heal from, you know, the sort of ways that we were taught in various ways to disempower us and to shame ourselves in different ways. I mean, I like, for instance, it was, and also to acknowledge how far we've come, like in India, it's even more, it's such a problem to even get sanitary supplies, that some girls leave school once they have their period. That's a lot of times when they stop going to school. And I'm like, well, that's, you know, like, that's horrifying to me. At least, you know, like, I'm like, well, at least I was able to go to school still after I got my period. But to imagine that that was your barrier to staying in school, you know, and you can't talk about it. And like, and this extends, of course, to our sexuality and a whole bunch of other things, and about pregnancy and childbirth, and how, and even getting back into psychedelics, you know, we focus a lot more on pharmaceutical orientation, towards ourselves and towards our world. And of course, we're going to see psychedelics as threatening to that. Because that, like, what's safe, what we define as safe is like, you go to a medical doctor, you get a prescription, and, you know, like, and first of all, that's not safe. I think several people in the community, at least, you know, like, at least for myself, like, I think I first had to get jaded a little bit, or hurt, or by what happened in pharmaceutical industry or medical profession, both for myself and for my family. That my same father I mentioned, I was taught to be afraid of mushrooms by, and whom I love dearly, who's passed, but I don't think he was served well by the pharmaceutical industry, even though his asthma was able to be controlled to an extent. But at the end of the day, I feel like, you know, well, what if we had been raised in a culture that embraced plant medicines? If we had, you know, it would be a different experience. It would have, you know, or even if you've looked at Gabor Mate's work in terms of paying attention to simply who's done, you know, over 30 years of working with people with addiction, and one of the things that really struck me in terms of his work is the fact he talks about one of the most common things that he saw in people who are considered quote unquote addicts was that they're highly sensitive people.
Yeah.
And I once asked him in a after Q&A session, what do you think someone should do if they are highly sensitive? Because I said, hey, I'm highly sensitive. I identify as being very highly sensitive and intuitive and much other things. But how can you avoid being traumatized? And in some ways, his answer was discouraging. But and also encouraging. It's like, well, no one asked you to change your eye color, but they asked you to not be sensitive. And in our culture, you know, you are not supported for being sensitive, and you end up getting traumatized,
Especially men.
Especially and especially men. And if you've been born in another culture, he says, like, you would have been identified as a shaman or a healer, or, you know, and be nurtured and raised as such, right? And that these traditions that we have ourselves, you know, not honored and respected, end up being in part the source of some of our very problems that we have in society today. And yet we blame the victim, literally, of people who are quote unquote addicted and have these substance dependencies. And then we blame the drugs that they're on, and then we blame even the substances that, you know, they seek to be able to seek out their healing. And I think that's on the consciousness raising sort of thing. I think the beautiful thing about the shifts that are happening now in the sort of psychedelic renaissance, a la Michael Pollan and other people who are trying to raise attention to all the psychedelic research, and but really it's awakening to this wisdom and knowledge that has always been there, and realizing our disconnection from nature, and realizing that we can create our own healing by reconnecting back again. to
Yeah.
ourselves, to our own consciousness, to not seeing our own consciousness as an enemy, as something to be afraid of, that plants are our allies, um, even open to the possibilities of them being beings in and of themselves that are worthy of respect, let alone the wisdom keepers who've been training for, like, in order to do ayahuasca ceremony in some traditions, you have to have been doing it for over, 20 years, and even to be considered close to a maestro of some sort.
Isn't that interesting too? And I think that's what I'm coming to realize too, is we've been lied to about how we're not one with nature. We see ourselves as separate from nature. And so we are more willing to be acceptable of things that are created in a lab. And I think, well, I came from nature and a plant comes from nature. Why are we not seeing that we're related and instead of separate? And I think, I mean, this idea of separateness falls through so many different ideologies that people pick up as their practices and beliefs, right? Like even when you get to Christianity, we're separate from God, right? In so many different denominations and teachings, you're separate from God, you're beneath God, you're not of one with God, and your goal is to learn how to be one with God. But or in a lot of other traditions, trying to teach you how to reconnect with nature. And it's like, well, you don't really actually have to reconnect. You just have to realize your already existing connection. You are from nature. And so I think that's what I'm seeing in a lot. Like, and what's kind of scary is, so TikTok is my go-to just for whatever entertainment and fun and doing something stupid, but at the same time I'm learning. And so many people I see are trying to help you reestablish your connection with nature by teaching you how to provide for yourself, to be more self-sustainable, to even care for your health. And you have the MSM tyrants telling you you should be offended by someone trying to teach you to be self-sustainable. And I'm like, that's scary. We should not be offended by someone telling me that dandelion root is good for heart health, right? We shouldn't be offended by someone saying you can go learn how to identify mushrooms and morels in your own native land and consume them as food for you, right? Like that shouldn't be a worry. That's not an extremist practice. That's a natural practice. And so then you get caught up in these paradigms where, like, you're an extremist, you're a prepper, you're planning for yourself, you're taking care of yourself. That's what we were born to do, right? Like nature doesn't need help. That we're nature. We don't really need help. We just need to be able to access the resources that help us adapt to the environment as it changes.
Well, and we get in our own way, right? And you're right, though, in terms of our relationship with nature, that was taught too. I mean, just look at the literature paradigms, like man versus man versus nature, nature versus, like, you know, versus when I realized I didn't finish the thought on the women's circle with the archetypes and connecting to Menses cycles, was that I never was taught that my cycles would cycle close to a moon cycle, and so then I started paying attention to, oh, am I full moon cycling or am I new moon cycling? Right now
That is so interesting because I've noticed that too. I'm like, wow, I really do line up with the full moon. I didn't
yeah,
even realize that.
that you tend to alternate between full moon cycling and new moon cycling,
Yes.
and it naturally shifts back and forth, and it's part of, you know and, and you just, a lot of these things are just, we we in any sort of society or any sort of perspective, we get fixed in our mindsets, and we can get just as fixed in a mindset saying, like, you got to connect to nature, as in, like, no, you have to use scientific inquiry to to understand these things, and it has to be through a therapist office, or no, it has to be through a trained shaman who's had X amount of years or whatever, right? And the cancel culture sort of idea, where people are just, correcting people, versus holding space for those ideas and really listening and trying to understand, and that compassionate inquiry that you espouse, right? That having, and I think that's, if I were to say some of the things that plant medicines have taught me and psychedelics have taught me, it, and even being in community with the psychedelic community has taught me, is first of all just how to really listen compassionately to myself and to others in community, And I was resistant for a long time to finding answers in community, mainly because I was taught to be independent, and that, you know, women should be independent and self-sufficient, and
Don't ask for help.
don't ask for, you know, but give help. Always give help, but don't ever ask for help. And
Be in
like,
service to others, but don't ask others to be in service to you.
yeah, because like if you ask for help, like, well, that's, you're just being selfish. You're not considering them, you know. And working through all of these sort of ideas, and just like, wait a second, you know, like, is that really true, you know? And even I think the response to ethics, right, as a practice, like, oh, ethics, like it automatically sounds clinical, you know, it automatically sounds, I mean, and there's good reason for that too, you know, right, that the tradition, Western tradition of ethics and ethical study has been analytical, has been trying to, in some sense, divorce the heart from the mind. And so much of our practices have disconnected us from ourselves. That, you know, I see us as heart, body, mind, and spirit. This is also a nod to Dene Nav's teachings, even though, again, I can't speak for that culture, but I want to acknowledge the source. That's the difference of cultural appropriation, by the way, is in part acknowledging the source of where the information come, if I got it from someone else, even if I can't speak for it.
Yeah.
And they talk about being a five-fingered being of five different senses, and then there's four invisible senses.
Invisible senses.
Yeah. But maybe I should let them teach you.
Okay.
You go to I know if you go to Navajo teachings, you can check out there's an elder who's giving spoken word, and that's another interesting thing, is that just even the way Western ideas are considered valid because you wrote a paper on it, and it's been peer reviewed, and it's scientific, and we have the data to support it, versus having a tradition that is oral. There's nothing written down. That's the tradition. It's given person to person, and you that's how you're taught, and that's how you learn, or you learn in nature, or you learn in practice, or that's how you learned about the plants, and you learned as it came up, as it arose.
Yeah, and it's backed by experience and emotionality on top of it.
Connection
Yeah.
through time. That's I think that's part of the aspect of reciprocity. People talk about reciprocity as a way to kind of help acknowledge indigenous traditions and practices, and not appropriate as much. But I think a lot of people misunderstand what reciprocity is. They think it in a Western sense of equal exchange, that if you give me this, I give you that. And, oh, we've taken all this, so we need to give X back.
Yeah. Or I gave you credit, or I quoted you. That's good enough. Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of like that sort of like we used to have in the West a very win-lose mindset, and some say we still do. And at least we're getting to like a win-win mindset a little bit more, which that's a little bit of like our Western concept in some ways what reciprocity is. I would not say it's the indigenous concept.
Yeah.
And versus what I would like, you know, I could jokingly call a win-win-win mindset, but a flourishing mindset, where it's about the relationship, and about like if you're around someone and your energy lifts up, and you're more supported by being in a relationship with them, that's true reciprocity. It's beyond reciprocity, really. It's a relationship over time. It's an understanding of each other's needs, so that, you know, if I understand that you need pads, you know, a real basic, you know, feminine exchange reciprocity, but or that, like, you know, that's what you do as a friendship in a relationship. That's what that sort of reciprocity is. It's not, you know, like an equal, you know, sometimes it will be unequal, but it's supportive, it's a flourishing, it's a garden that grows more seeds and that flourish into plants than grow weeds, you know, that aren't toxic.
Yeah.
And go to a lot of, like, for instance, in the Amazon rainforest, like where we are being toxic to those relationships, because we're just not just in the sort of, almost seems stereotypical to say we're destroying the rainforest, or we're having oil and treating them in ways that make use of the land and not respect the land, and also doesn't respect the relationship.
Yeah.
That, you know, we think like, oh, we need to acknowledge the traditions, or use their traditions, or go there to the Amazon, you know, not that you shouldn't, and that isn't a good idea as one way to be in relationship. But we are doing other things too, that there's this sense that like, oh, you should stop the cutting too, or the oil things, like that's all, it's all aspects of the relationship. It's not just
Yeah, it's recognizing the consequences that come as a result of you not engaging reciprocity and you
yes,
wanting to make the change and the
and
transformation.
yes, and if you think about nature and you understand that we truly are interconnected, and even in a deeper spiritual sense, that what I do does impact you. Whether and there's that idea of the 7 generations, right? 7 generations back, you think about how everything you do affects 7 generations back. Again, multiple indigenous traditions have this idea, and 7 generations forward.
Mm.
And it's not because you owe them a debt, it's because you are affecting them. You are a part of those generations.
Because we're all connected.
We're all connected. You are connected to, like for me, I have a redwood. I'm in the redwoods in Boulder Creek, and I am connected to my forest. And as I build relationship, it's more supportive of me. That to be disconnected from nature, disconnected from these relationships, whether it's people or plants or the environment or elements, it serves me to be connected, because that like you were saying earlier, that you're never apart from nature. That's the illusion. The illusion is the separateness, that the mindset, the sort of the fear mindset of separateness, of how can you be afraid of something that you are?
Mm. Yeah, but we are afraid of what we are.
And then like literally people saying false evidence appearing real, and it is, and that's part of the, at least for me, part of the gift of plant medicines too, is and a lot of people will say, like for instance with mushrooms, with psilocybin, with mycorrhiza, that one of the first things that comes across is people feeling that honestly understanding the harm that they've caused, or understanding that connection and feeling more connected. Granted, the research is still out on that, but you don't have to believe me. But and everyone's experience is different. But there is a greater sense of being able to feel more connected, because you're able to recognize and see it and feel it in a way that, I'm trying to remember. I wish I could remember the source of this. It actually came out in one of the talks at the DMT conference, and I'm pretty sure maybe it was the psilocybin conference. I'm probably going to just mess up all the references, so no one's going to be able to find it. But someone's retelling the story of having had a journey, and when they were looking outside originally before the journey, they saw the buildings before they saw the trees. But then afterwards, they started seeing the trees first before they saw the buildings. That reversal of foreground, background, of connecting, that like, just like, you and I can connect better in person, versus, over a screen or behind a mask. Not that masks, I do support masks, but those, or being in a car versus walking side by side.
Yeah.
That sense of separateness that's created, but we can feel, it's easier for us to feel connected to people because we've been more supported in connecting to humans. But when we're not supported to connecting to nature and connect and having these relationships, or having community in particular ways, then we're reinforcing those disconnections versus the connections.
Yeah, right. Like we've spent, at least in my generation, mocking the grandmas that talk to their plants and their tomatoes. And
yeah.
I come, and I lived on a farm for 11 years and before I moved here. And so like my whole goal was I am connecting with the earth, with the dirt, with the plants, with the trees, but coming to an appreciation for why the old grandmas are talking to their plants and why they're having conversations with them, because I've found myself doing that. Like, oh, look at what's going on here. You're sick. Okay. So I need to pay attention to, oh, look at it's because you're by chlorine. Like when I moved here, we have a pool and I noticed some of these plants just looked horrible. And I'm like, because you're too close to the pool. You don't like that, right? It's recognizing that you can have a dialogue with the nature in front of you, that the nature that's in your proximity, and that you can participate in a healing relationship with it, where you are
So
regenerating them, and that plant life is regenerating you.
it's
So
so
for
true.
me,
I
that's
mean,
been that way.
Growing up, we moved around a lot every single year, pretty much. And now I've had this home that I live in now. I'm trying to think of what year it was, but it's like I think it was 2006. So it's been about almost 15 years or so. And you get to know the plants and the nature that are here. And I was evacuated from the fires here, from the CCU complex fires, for a month. And having been a part of the sort of literally the natural cycles that are here in this place with these plants, with these trees, I could tell that even a year later, I could see that they're still healing. And I can see, I know that, in myself too, it also mirrored my own healing from having, been evacuated and having the fear of those fires and things like that arose. But also being able to recognize that natural process of it, that it's still happening and growing and changing all the time. And I love the idea of the grandmother talking to the tomato plants. It's so funny because I was starting to think like, well, when did my relationship with plants begin? I mean, it started with the ones that I was having more conscious ones. Like I have this San Pedro plant I've had for over 20 years that I've, for the record, never have consumed. But I have a very deep relationship with this San Pedro plant. And
San Pedro plant, is that mescaline?
it's Huachuma mescaline, yeah.
Okay.
And it's legal to grow, for those of you paying attention. We can talk about where I dance, but even I realized like the orchids my father would tend to, or the violets my grandmother tended, like that, those relationships, like I have a special relationship to those plants because they were part of my upbringing, that connection was nurtured. That was the, like, wow, like I didn't think about that I had a better relationship with those plants simply because that was what was nurtured over time. And we would take those plants with us when we moved. So I had those potted plants I strangely, would have these relationships with, including that cactus who got moved to Washington and back and even got in a car accident with me. So like,
and is still thriving. That's
it is
impressive.
still thriving. As a matter of fact, it just finished another flowering, and it just made, it's like having kids. It's like, oh my God, because it doesn't flower all the time.
I
And
was like that with my yucca plant when it flowered. I'd be like, oh my God, I've never seen this flower before. I had it 15 years. Holy crap. Yeah.
Right. And actually I've also given it menstrual blood too. Like, I guess you want to know how, like,
Blood meal. That makes sense. When you started talking about that, I didn't even flinch because I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Blood meal.
Yeah. And I was even thinking about this morning, because we were mentioning that I was menstruating now, and I'm like, and now I feel like, oh, I'm like almost like I'm wasting some if I don't.
God, the amount of blood sometimes I shed. I really should. I'm gonna go get one of those little cups now. Maybe
Well, I have the cups. I don't always use them,
I don't either.
And then I have the pads too that you can like soak and then squeeze and then use the water to anyway. But I
have some plants that are sick right now. So
yeah,
next cycle, but anyway.
But just the idea of like, or doing intentional ceremony for seed planting, like that, the all the relationships and like you can literally, in terms of like little things you can do, like literally planting an intention with a seed. This was an idea that came from the workshop ceremony I helped moderate at the psilocybin conference, and the gal there who did that, and I apologize for her, I don't remember her name right now. Names is a struggle for me, as you can't tell, but and being able to watch that, literally watch the intention grow, and that we can enrich our lives so much by everything that you can learn from plant medicines, whether you take them or not. A lot of these practices, even around like integration circles, that really are a way to hold space for each other and really listen compassionately. And we could all do a better job of being in compassionate, loving community with each other. And if the plant medicines help you with that, then more power to you.
Do you lead or guide people to use plant medicine?
I do. I don't talk about it much, but I do.
Or do you not want to talk about it?
No, I can. I'm an open book.
Okay.
Right. And I kind of trust that whatever conversation comes up is what's supposed to come up.
Yeah. So you're someone that like will help walk a person through a plant medicine journey?
Yeah, I've helped people through plant medicine journeys and done consulting. So like usually like if you see it on like my site, like I say, I do psychedelic ethics, that's more primary, and I do ethics advising, which is more primary. But in terms of coming to this space, I realized that I'm a double Reiki master too. So I was doing healing work related to that energy work, and I was kind of surprised, spiritually surprised, that I was led to do help for people with these journeys, mainly because I had my own conceptions I had to get over about psychedelics. And I'm like, well, like I jokingly call it spiritual elitism. Like, well, you don't need that to be able to reach these sort of states or
Yeah.
relationships. And to some extent that's true, but another extent in terms of me being humbled by plant medicines and others is that there's some healing that can be really supported and that can be more profound and helpful, especially if you're resistant in particular ways. And not that you have to be resistant to be able to, but like it opens you up for more profound healing and insights if you're willing to journey into those spaces. And it's a very, that's why people talk about heroic journeys and things like that, is that there is this sense of heroism, of being willing to go within and look within and not just face your shadows, but also your light. And it's a really beautiful, it's the most humbling and honorable thing that someone could have ever allowed me to do for them. It's like being witness to a childbirth and being present for someone during that experience. It's a real honor and a privilege. I don't do it often. It is a demanding practice, and that's one of the things that I think about now in terms of the ethics of the space, is that there aren't enough guides. And when I started serving more to what I call a psychedelic facilitator, whether it's like giving people, just having someone that could feel like they could trust to give them some thoughts, right? Like just like I do ethics advising, which some people call coaching or something like that, whether it's through a company or an individual. It's to help them make their own choices. We are all always on a journey of our lives and our experiences, and healing and transforming and growing, and being able to help someone make any of those decisions, I feel is a privilege. And that turned out to include psychedelic plant medicines, and mainly finding a way that I could talk about it. And I felt responsibility because I could, and I was being led to. People were starting to show up who were actually already in state to me. And so I'm like, okay, I guess I'm doing this. At first it wasn't a choice.
Well, the universe chose you, though.
The universe chose me, and in humility, I'm like, okay, I'm like, are you sure? Like, cause like, and so I'm still very much in the curious space with it. It's like, where is that part going to go? But ethically speaking, like, I really do believe in the transformative aspects of this work, the healing aspects of this work. And I feel an obligation that if I can, I ought to, and especially in where I am in a decriminalized area,
Yeah.
To not offer that and be in community and supportive. And it actually makes me a better ethicist in psychedelic ethics. To me, it's about being responsible in psychedelic ethics. I keep joking because I wouldn't say I was a huge psychonaut before I really got involved in this space. But I really do feel that you need to experience the medicines in order to be able to not only support the journeys, but also I feel to really understand why people seek them and what you're experiencing, and to talk about it in a more ethical way. So I was joking for with a friend that I'm like, well, I guess I'm gonna have to take a lot more drugs, but I'm like, and then that's not that I have to, in terms of I'm not going to be giving journeys and all those other sort of, I mean, like everyone has their specialties, I feel. But in the sense of being able to talk about, like, like I'm studying Amanita muscaria with Amanita Dreamer through the San Francisco Psychedelic Society, and that's all part of part of my psychedelic ethics research to be able to understand it. Like, okay, is this something people should be doing or not doing? Is this dangerous or not dangerous?
Is that the sacred mushroom that John Allegra wrote about in the 70s? The red and white mushroom?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of ancestral traditions, and part of what led me to it in the beginning was trying to like get reconnected to what maybe my own ancestral traditions. Like, okay, since I'm disconnected to my own history and my own and I can't ask an elder from my lineage or has the herbal or medicine or woman or man or whoever or Shaw person, it's like, well, you know, I have Irish and Celtic and lineage and such. And I'm like, well, they had relationships with mushrooms. And so it's like, well, maybe I should explore that. And only to realize that I've had mushroom relationship my whole entire life. Right. I just didn't think about it that way. It's like I've been being taught the whole entire time that, and that the beauty of having been raised to be afraid of mushrooms even more explicitly than some, is that it makes me better suited in a lot of ways to help people through their own fears
Wow,
about
yeah.
mushrooms in particular, but all psychedelics, and help, and the ethics and the philosophy help me to hold space for different ideas and allow people to experience what they want to experience, not what I'm intending for them to experience. And I think that's on the list of things that are ethical dangers in this space, is that because we all come in with our own mindsets and intentions, that it always affects your experience.
Yeah.
People, the stereotype line of set and setting, sometimes people think set is just your intention, but it's everything you bring to the table. If you think of if you think about setting a table,
Yeah.
the setting is like the place and where you do it in the environment, but it's everything. It's not just the intention, it's everything you can, it's the dieta, it's like whatever food you consumed, it's all the things you believe about yourself, all your family experience, your lineage, everything that is you is what you're bringing to the experience. I used to tell people that, you know, it only brings out what's already within. But we're not very good at knowing what's within.
No, I think, yeah, because I think we're afraid of both the good and the bad that's within, right? Because like you talked earlier about, you also discover the light within, not just the darkness. But I think a lot of us, I know this is true for me, discovering my own light within to a degree made me scared, because I was like, oh, maybe I'm not living up to my fullest potential. And then what if I let myself down and I can't live up to the light that I see? And that can be like self-deprecating in itself. But then also coming face to face with your darkness, you have to be real honest with yourself about your potentiality. And again, a lot of people are like, I'm good right here with this little frame right here. This is me. I don't want to see what else could be me. And it's, so how do we find more comfort in that?
And I'll tell you the beauty of what you just said in part is that if you really want to know your light, you also have to know your shadow. And like that sort of yin yang symbol, right? You know, I sometimes try and explain, like, okay, well, what do ethicists do? You know, it's like, why is it that, you know, well, how is it that you could be familiar with shadow? And I was contemplating this, and I'm like, well, really, ethicists swim in gray waters, dancing at the edge of darkness in the light. And
that's poetic.
Oh, thank you. But it's true, because it's the parts of you that are the most beautiful and the most light are also the aspects that are your shadow. Like I know that I happen to be greatly empathetic and sensitive and compassionate. It's partly how I came. It also was nourished as a feminine, but it also is what I embrace, that love and compassion and community. Those are all very much in alignment with that. But it comes with a shadow too. The greater I am and more I delve into being loving and compassionate and towards community, the shadow element of not receiving love, of not being open to it, of not also serving it in kind, that's the shadow is in it. Literally is what you don't see. It's what's hidden through the light, right? There's a Zen koan that says, you know, you stand in your own shadow and you wonder why it's dark. you know. And there's a real truth to that, that like, or I'll tell my kids, we all have our strengths and our weaknesses, and like, like both my kids are dyslexic, neurodiverse, and my son is an exceptional dyslexic amongst dyslexics, and that you could say like, well, that's a real disability, but it's because of his ability that it's there. He is incredibly gifted in terms of pattern thinking and visual perception, and like, I'm sure if he decided to be an engineer or whatever, it's incredibly gifted in those things, but it happens to also have the reverse effect of not being able to code and decode words very well. And he's about to turn 14, and he reads roughly at a first grade level.
Yeah.
And it's not because he hasn't tried.
But I bet you he can listen at a college level. So there's always that.
Exactly. Yeah, but this is the thing. This is exactly like the shadow and the light, the strength and the weakness. It's I think, it's funny because like I used to look for like, well, I was looking for that one thing I was going to be good at. Like that was like the sort of mindset you're kind of raised up. And it's like, okay, figure that thing out, go to school in it, become an expert in it. And then focus on that, and that'll be your thing. I mean, psychedelic ethics is my thing, but I didn't, it was a very long journey to get here. And doing this work, I've like never been happier, never felt more aligned. And, but all of the parts to get here, it's like, you're never off path. Right. A lot of people talk about Joseph Campbell, right, and think about archetypes and the hero's journey or heroine's journey. Yeah. And you hear the line, follow your bliss, and that's because he was looking at Sat Chit Ananda, and he's like, well, I don't know what, and this part of what would mean in terms of a full consciousness awakening and things. And he's like, well, I don't know what right consciousness is, and I don't know what right being is, but I do know what my bliss is. And I'll follow my bliss. It's just like, and if you follow that path of bliss, you'll find that the path is, you've always been on path, and the path has been with you all along. And
it's just now you're starting to see the trees instead of the buildings.
Yeah, like you were mentioning before about like, oh, you're onto all these different things. It's like, well, like the tarot and whether it's tarot or like my delve into energy work, or I also did work at I've also a registered nursing assistant and did work at an adult family home for the family members, and like, even teaching at the university and all these different things. They all come together into what I'm doing now. That because of like all my spiritual practices, it makes me more able to be a part of the community that I'm trying to help represent and be a part of. As well as understanding psychedelics. And it is a spiritual, for me, it is a spiritual practice. It is a spiritual relationship, but in that sense, it's almost mute, because all relationships are spiritual relationships to me.
I agree with you. They really are. I think everything is just spiritual and sacred and connected. And it's just like our goal to like actually start to see it and then embrace it, and then always engage it.
No, I mean, like, it takes time. I mean, like, it is a beautiful, I mean, all of it is a beautiful journey. I mean, like, it's like that idea. It's like, you either think everything has meaning in the universe, or you think nothing has meaning in the universe. I think that was a reference to Einstein, but it really is that way. And I think we're starting to heal that aspect of ourselves, whether it's connection to nature, connection to spirituality, connection to each other, and realizing that how we've been doing things, at least in the West, hasn't been working for us.
Yeah.
And we like to think that it was working to some extent, but like, at least now where we're going and who we want to be, we don't want to use people merely as a mere means to an end, a la sort of Kantian Kant argued for that for centuries ago, or character-based ethics, and like Aristotle, or Confucianism, or Buddhism, or Lao Tzu. All these traditions had more about your character and who you were as a person, not about what you did. Or having right relationship would turn into right action, not the other way around.
Yes, that is the foundation, right relationship. I think from there, everything else just kind of grows and nourishes into what it's supposed to, blossoms into a big, beautiful fruit. Once we recognize that. Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh my gosh. I am so thankful that I came across you and that you shared this space with me and shared all this wonderful information with the audience. Truly. Can we direct people to connect with you? How would you like to be reached if people have more information or just want to follow you or your work or what you're doing?
Yeah, I suppose that like that's one of my grow areas is I'm not very good about self-promotion or like,
I'm not either.
I'm like, I do have a website. You can the easiest thing to tell people is to look for ohanaforest.com, just because it's easy to spell. My last name Dreisbach is hard to spell. And if I tell you to go to sandradreisbach.com but I pretty consistently show up like on Twitter, Instagram, and platforms as drsandradreisbach.com, unless you're on like Discord, and then I'm Heartfire Spirit.
Heartfire Spirit.
Yeah, Heartfire
Yeah.
Spirit on Discord and Clubhouse.
Fire Spirit. I have both. I'm gonna find you on
You're gonna
the
find
rare
me.
occasions I use
Yeah.
Discord and
Yeah, I'm still getting comfortable with being seen. That's part of my work. And like you're saying about embracing your light, I'm trying to show up now. I'm trying to be more open, and I felt pretty convicted when I realized there weren't a lot of ethicists in this space. Not because that there has to be, but because I could be of service. And then
absolutely.
realizing that more people need to be visible and be open and talk openly about their psychedelic use and work with plant medicines. And I didn't realize it was going to be my thing, but it certainly
It's your
is.
thing. Yeah.
It's my thing.
It's your thing. It's your
It
thing.
makes
And
me
we
so
celebrate
happy.
that. And
I
I'm
know,
just,
it's really fun. So like I'm willing to talk about everything, like and so I feel like now, like the more openly I talk about everything I do and what I'm doing, someone's got to be willing to do it. And I know there's a lot of people in this space who are, but I'm like, heck, if an ethicist isn't willing to do it, that there's a real problem.
well, I thank you for working on developing that state of being seen and honoring our audience with
And
all that you had to share. So again,
thank you
thank
for
you so
encouraging me.
much. Appreciate this.